Thank you so much, Pilar, for introducing me. I've already shared my screen. Can you see my slides?
Yes, yes, it's
Is
perfect.
it full
Thank you.
screen already?
Full screen, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay. Um, So for today's talk, I think, okay, first of all, I'm Nicole from Shenzhen University, in China. So for today's talk, I'm going to share a bit about my research on translations, in children's paradise. Okay. It was the most popular and the longest running children's magazine in Hong Kong. As you can see, it was published from 1953 to 1994. This is the very first issue of this magazine. In my research, I placed the translation in the context of Cold War cultural diplomacy, with a special focus on the role of the Union. The Union is the organization which founded and published the magazine. So for today's talk, I will first present the research gap and my question, and then I will walk you through a bit of the textual analysis to talk about the key findings, the major findings of my research. And finally, I think I will wrap up with a brief conclusion. Okay. So during the Cold War in Asia, the US government sponsored many agencies in producing, publishing, and marketing culture works as a way to counter communist ideologies. And in academia, many studies have already focused on American patronage and see these translations as serving US interests. But if we look at the historical record, many agencies, especially those outside of the official channels or with looser ties to the states, they actually translated materials on their own terms and according to their own agendas. So I would say their translations were more likely responsive to the localized and multifaceted contexts rather than a centralized directive. And this is very true when we look at how the sponsorship flows from the states to Children's Paradise, because the union was founded by Asia Foundation. So Asia Foundation is an entity associated with the U.S. government's covert operations in Asia. Because of this association, the Children's Paradise, I would say CP hereafter. So CP has long been labeled as anti-communism, despite insufficient textual evidence. But quite recently, we have found some uncovered archives and personal accounts which challenge that view because they suggest that there were no direct financial ties between the magazine and the Asia Foundation, especially in the 1970s, because at that time the foundation had already stopped all fundings to the union. So the union organization was no longer a funder to the Union Press, which is responsible for publishing, translating Children's Paradise. But what is intriguing is that it was during exactly the same decade that CP achieved paramount success among Hong Kong's young audience. So all these historical facts have led me to reevaluate CP and its translation with a focus on the union's agendas in the historical context of 1970s Hong Kong. So my question is that how did the translation published in CP relate to union's own agendas instead of the one-sided perspective on American patronage? Okay. So speaking of the union is a third force, which means that it is a group that envisioned a democratic China rooted in authentic Chinese cultural values. But this vision was quite different from both major parties at that time. The Communist Party of China, that is CPC, and the Kuomintang, which is KMT. So after the Chinese Civil War between the two parties, as the CPC took control of the Chinese mainland while the KMT retreated to Taiwan, the Union relocated to Hong Kong. Um, And in the 1970s, because the former president of the States, President Nicholson, made a historical visit to China in 1972, so the Sino-American relations improved a lot, based on a neutral based on a neutral interest to contain the influence from the former Soviet Union. So this changed how American cultural diplomacy played out in Hong Kong, especially for the British colonial government, because at that time, the British colonial government ruled Hong Kong as a colony. For a long time, the British has taken a hands-off approach to Hong Kong's cultural identity, but in the 1970s, they became more proactive in shaping a colonial identity for Hong Kong people. Um, as the communist ideologies spilled over from the Chinese mainland during the Cultural Revolution. So it is against this historical context that I did my textual analysis. So one pattern of all the translations published in CP, one pattern of it that stood out was the exclusion of the term or of the word China. It means in every case where China appeared in the original text to designate the geographical location of China, it was either taken out or replaced in the translation. And I think this has happened throughout the translations in the 1970s in different stories and in different episodes more than 10 times as I've counted them. So for example, here you can see this is a story called Little Bear's Wish. This is the original. As you can see in the original, the little bear makes five wishes, including floating on a cloud and driving a red car and traveling to China through a channel to find chopsticks. And then the fourth one, driving a red car to meet a princess, and then the princess presents him with a cake. And on the right side of it, it is the Chinese translation published in CP. As you can see, the wish about China was removed entirely, both the words and the pictures, while the other four wishes stayed the same. Okay. So we might assume that the Union would highlight or would like to present the Western countries and leave out any mention of communist ones. But this assumption doesn't hold up when we look at the translations in the CP at the same time, which include the Soviet Union. For example, there's one story about a Gulliver. It is a guinea pig who travels to the Soviet Union. Um, and if you can see the picture here, um, the Russian people actually help him to succeed in a big performance. And you can see the image of the Soviet Union is actually very positive. So from this instance, we could say it is clear that the CP didn't avoid showing communist countries. So what I would argue is that the specific exclusion of China actually reflects the Union's vision of building a democratic China rooted in authentic Chinese culture, because this ideal stood in contrast to the CPC initiated Cultural Revolution at that time. And meanwhile, the Union also, by doing this, the Union also distanced itself from the KMT root Taiwan, because the Union usually criticized the governance in Taiwan because they think it is too autocratic. So the absence of the geographic term China in the translations actually signals a rejection of both political stances. Okay. And the second pattern I've found of the translations in CP is that all the STs, all the source texts have been extensively domesticated by a replacement of the original verbal and visual elements, and with those very obviously reflective of traditional Chinese culture. So in this way, the translations in CP promote a cultural and historical China. There were extensive domestications of verbal expressions, but for today's talk, I only include the examples from visual elements. As you can see, this is on the right side. It is the Chinese version of a Japanese manga Doraemon. You can see the image of the warriors was changed a lot. You can see this character. For this character, you can see his hairstyle and shoes were replaced in the Chinese translation with traditional styles from ancient China. You can see the hat is different. And for the warrior who is riding on a horse, um, he originally wears a helmet with these horn-like decorations. It is very typical of Japanese culture, but this feature was redrawn with a red tassel on the top of his helmet. Uh, the same happens to this warrior. As you can see, the hat is changed to a totally different style. Um, and this tassel, this red tassel, is actually a symbol of victory in Chinese culture. Okay. So I think by domesticating the foreign cultural elements into Chinese contexts, the CP what CP is doing is actually retelling the stories of China's past glory in ways that felt fresh and appealing to young readers in Hong Kong. And this effort to reconnect young generations with traditional Chinese culture should be viewed as a response to local concerns because after the Chinese Civil War, the split between the two parties that I've mentioned before divided the Chinese nation both physically and ideologically, which leads to a widespread Chinese diaspora. So for the union, because they're still Chinese people and most of them are Chinese intellectuals, this kind of dispersion threatened China's strength as a unified nation. So in response, the union promoted a shared cultural identity rooted in Chinese civilization, that is the cultural and historical China. So it is a more like a depoliticized idea based on the Chinese history and Chinese culture. So this notion of Chinese civilization offered comfort and a sense of belonging to people of all the Chinese people with the Chinese descendants, regardless of their political views or location. So in colonial Hong Kong, back in the 1970s, this cultural promotion also acted as a covert form of resistance, which helps young people to stay connected to their Chinese heritage, which was at risk of fading under the British rule. Okay. I think here comes the conclusion. To wrap up, I believe that looking at children's paradise through the lens of the union's China-centric agenda gives us a more fresh, a more nuanced understanding of the magazine, because this perspective moves us beyond the usual view that sees the US-funded cultural products only through the lens of political influence or from the American patronage. I think it can help us to move beyond the preventable bias, the insights from the perspective of patronage on US associate cultural products. And I think this approach also opens up space to explore more diverse and interesting aspects of translation. Okay. Because of the time limits, I can't go into all the details from the published paper today, but if you're interested, you feel free to check it out. It includes all the three translation patterns, which I wasn't able to fully cover in this talk. I think that's all from me. Thank you for your attention.